She dropped to her knees in the snow, lifted her silent baby toward the stranger, and whispered the words, "No mother should ever speak. Take her. Just let her live." The rancher stood in the doorway, saying nothing. His eyes moved from the dying infant to the broken woman begging at his feet. Then he stepped forward. What happened next would change both their lives forever. If you want to hear how this desperate mother found salvation in the coldest place on earth, subscribe now and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. This is a tale of survival sacrifice and a love that grew from silence. Chapter. Clara Winslow had stopped feeling her feet 2 miles back. The snow came up past her ankles, now soaking through boots that had already split at the seams. Every step was a negotiation with a body that wanted to quit. Her arms burned from holding Nettie against her chest, but she would not shift the baby's weight. She would not set her down. She would carry her daughter until her legs gave out, and then she would crawl. 3 houses, 3 doors, 3 refusals. The first farmhouse had shown a flicker of candlelight through frosted windows. Clara had knocked until her knuckles bled against the wood. A woman's voice from inside. "We ain't got nothin' for beggars. Move on." Clara had pressed her face to the door crack. "Please, my baby hasn't eaten. She's not crying anymore. Something's wrong." Silence, then footsteps moving away. The second house belonged to a man who opened the door just wide enough to look her up and down. His eyes caught on her torn dress, her bare ring finger, the bundle in her arms. "Where's your husband?" "Gone," Clara said. It wasn't a lie, not really. "Then you ain't my problem?" The door closed. The third house was the cruelest. A woman answered, took one long look at Nettie's pale face, and actually laughed. "Another one running from something," she said. "You girls never learn. Should have stayed where you belonged." The slam rattled Clara's teeth. Now she was walking toward the last light. She could see a faint glow at the edge of the valley, where the land dipped low and the cedar trees stood like frozen sentinels. Smoke rose from a chimney, thin and gray against the white sky. If this door closed too, she would lie down in the snow with her daughter and wait for the cold to finish what Virgil had started. Nettie hadn't cried in hours. At first, Clara told herself that was good. A quiet baby was an easy baby. But she knew better. She'd heard other mothers talk about the silence that came before the worst. When an infant stopped fussing, stopped squirming, stopped demanding, that wasn't peace. That was surrender. Clara pulled back the shawl wrapped around Nettie's face. The baby's lips were bluish. Her eyes were closed. But her chest still rose and fell, barely, like a whisper she could almost not hear. "Stay with me," Clara breathed. "Just a little longer. Mama's going to fix this. Mama's going to—" Her voice cracked. She had no idea how to fix anything. The ranch house emerged slowly from the white blur of the storm. It was smaller than she expected, built low against the hillside, like it was trying not to be noticed. A barn stood to the left, its doors sealed tight. A fence wrapped around the property, the posts carved from cedar, each one placed with deliberate care. Someone lived here who knew how to survive. Clara reached the gate. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, but they had lost all feeling hours ago. She had to use both palms, pressing down with the weight of her body before it clicked open. The walk from gate to porch was 30 steps. She counted them. It gave her something to focus on besides the burning in her lungs and the terrible stillness of the baby in her arms. 23, 24, 25. She climbed the porch steps, raised her fist, knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Clara pressed her ear to the wood, listening for movement inside. Was the house empty? Had the smoke been old, left over from a fire that had already died? Then footsteps. Heavy, measured. Approaching. The door swung open. A man filled the frame. Tall, broad through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they could bend iron. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled past his elbows, suspenders hanging loose at his hips. His face was rough with stubble, his dark hair pushed back like he'd been running his fingers through it. But his eyes, brown deep guarded, were what stopped her. Those eyes had seen things, lost things, survived things. He said nothing, just looked at her. Clara tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp. "Please." She swallowed, tried again. "I'm just asking for a piece of bread. Enough to make milk for my baby. That's all. Please." The man's gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. He turned slightly as if about to step back inside. "No!" Clara's legs buckled. She dropped to her knees on the porch, the impact jarring through her frozen bones. Tears spilled hot and sudden down her wind-burned cheeks, melting tiny paths through the frost on her skin. "Please, take the bread. Take her." She lifted Nettie with both hands, holding the baby out toward the stranger like an offering, like a sacrifice. "I just want her to live. That's all I want." Her voice broke into a sob. "You can keep her. She deserves a warm home. I can't give her that. I've tried so hard, and I can't. I can't." She bowed her head, ashamed of the words, but unable to stop them. "She's only 3 months old. She hasn't done anything wrong. She doesn't deserve to die because of me." The man stood motionless. The wind howled past the porch, throwing snow against Clara's back. Inside the house, a fire crackled its warmth, leaking through the open doorway like something she could almost taste. She waited for him to close the door. Instead, he moved forward. Without a word, he pulled the heavy coat from his own shoulders and knelt in front of her. His movements were careful, precise, the movements of a man who knew how to handle fragile things. He wrapped the coat around her and Nettie together, tucking the edges beneath Clara's chin, pulling the collar up to shield the baby's face from the wind. Then, he slid one arm beneath Clara's elbow and lifted. "Can you stand?" His voice was low, rough at the edges like something unused. Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. He guided her through the doorway. The warmth hit her like a wall. She gasped, her lungs suddenly remembering what air without ice crystals felt like. Her knees nearly gave way again, but his arm was there, steady, keeping her upright. He led her to a chair near the hearth and lowered her into it with a gentleness that surprised her. "Don't move," he said. He crouched in front of her and reached for Nettie. Clara's arms tightened instinctively, but he didn't pull. He just waited, hands open, patient. "I need to check her," he said quietly. "See if she's hurt." Clara looked at his face, at the lines around his eyes, the weathered skin, the jaw tight with something she couldn't name. There was no cruelty there, no judgment. Slowly, she loosened her grip. He took Nettie, carefully cradling her in the crook of one arm, while his other hand peeled back the frozen shawl. His fingers moved over the baby's face, her neck, her chest. He pressed 2 fingers beneath her jaw, then leaned close to listen to her breathing. "She's cold," he said finally. "Real cold. But she's alive." Clara's sob came out as a broken laugh. "She's alive. We need to warm her slow. Too fast, and it'll shock her system." He stood. "Stay by the fire. I'll get blankets." He disappeared through a doorway, and Clara heard the sound of a chest opening, fabric being moved. She sat frozen, not from cold this time, but from disbelief. Her eyes moved around the room, taking in details she'd been too desperate to notice before. A wooden rocking horse tipped on its side near the corner. A pair of small boots by the door, child-sized. A sampler on the wall stitched with uneven letters, "Home." This house had known children. The man returned with an armful of wool blankets. He wrapped one around Clara's shoulders, then took Nettie and swaddled her in another, leaving only her face exposed. He held the baby against his chest, tucking her beneath his chin. "Your skin's warmer than any blanket," he said when Clara opened her mouth to protest. "I'll hold her till she pinks up." He settled into the chair across from her, Nettie small and still against his broad chest. The firelight threw shadows across his face, softening the hard lines. Clara watched him rock slightly, a motion that seemed instinctive, like something his body remembered even if his mind didn't. "You have children," she said. It wasn't a question. His rocking paused. 1 heartbeat. 2. "A son." His voice was flat. "Emmett. He's asleep in the back room." Clara waited. "His mother died when he was born." He continued. He didn't look at her. 4 years ago now. Winter like this one. Couldn't get the doctor in time. Couldn't get anyone." The fire cracked. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be. You didn't know her." "I know you." He looked up, then finally meeting her eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You don't." But there was no hardness in the words. Just truth. Nettie's color began to return within the hour. First her lips fading from blue to pale pink, then her cheeks warming with the faintest flush. When she finally opened her eyes and let out a thin mewling cry, Clara burst into tears. "She's hungry," the man said. "When's the last time she ate?" "Yesterday morning. I tried to nurse her, but I haven't been able to, the cold and the walking, and I haven't eaten either, so there's no—" "I've got goat's milk, it'll work." He handed Nettie back to Clara, then disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen. She heard the clatter of pots, the splash of liquid. Clara held her daughter close, breathing in the baby smell of her, the warmth now radiating from her tiny body. "I'm sorry," she murmured against Nettie's forehead. "I'm so sorry. Mama's never going to let anyone hurt you again. I promise." The man returned with a small glass bottle fitted with a rubber nipple. The milk inside was warm. Clara could see the steam rising. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it'll keep her alive until you can feed her yourself." Clara took the bottle with shaking hands. Nettie latched on immediately, sucking with desperate hunger. The sound of it, greedy, alive, demanding, was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever heard. "Thank you." She looked up at him, tears streaming freely now. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." He sat back down across from her, watching the baby eat. "Silas," he said. "Silas Brennan." "Clara Winslow." She paused. "This is Nettie. Annette, really, but I call her Nettie." Silas nodded once. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire popped and settled. Nettie drank until the bottle was empty, then fell asleep with the nipple still in her mouth, milk dribbling down her chin. Clara wiped it away with her thumb. "You can stay tonight," Silas said finally. "Storm's not letting up. You try to leave now, you'll both be dead by morning." Clara's throat tightened. I don't have any way to repay you." "Didn't ask for payment." "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before she could stop it. 3 houses turned me away. 3. 1 woman laughed at me. Why are you different? Silas stared into the fire for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant. 4 years ago, I stood on this porch holding my son. He was burning up with fever. Roads were buried under 6 feet of snow. Couldn't get to town. Couldn't get anyone to come here. He paused. I sat up all night feeding the fire and praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. Watched my boy fight for his life with nothing but warm blankets and goat's milk. He looked at her. Emmett made it, but I remember what it felt like, standing there helpless, knowing that if he died it would be because I couldn't save him. Clara held Nettie tighter. So when I see a woman on her knees in the snow offering me her child because she's got nothing left to give. Silas shook his head. I can't close that door. I won't. Something passed between them. Not understanding exactly. Something deeper. Thank you, Clara said again. This time it meant more. Silas stood. There's a room at the end of the hall. It was supposed to be a nursery once. Never got finished, but there's a bed. Get some sleep. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. He started toward the doorway, then stopped. "Clara." She looked up. "That man you're running from. He going to come looking?" Clara's blood turned cold. She hadn't told him anything. How did he— "I've seen that look before," Silas said quietly. "Woman doesn't run in a blizzard with a newborn unless she's running from something worse than the cold." Clara swallowed. "Yes, he'll come." Silas nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Clara alone with the fire and her sleeping baby, and a feeling she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Safety. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a child's laughter. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was soft, softer than anything she'd slept on in months. The blankets were warm. Nettie lay beside her in a nest of pillows, sleeping peacefully, her cheeks pink and round. Then memory rushed back. The snow, the closed doors, the silent rancher who'd knelt in front of her and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. Clara sat up slowly, every muscle aching. The room was small, but clean. A window showed a world still buried in white, but the storm had passed. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost on the glass. Someone had placed a pitcher of water on the nightstand, along with a folded towel and a dress plain brown cotton worn but whole. Not her dress. Someone else's. A ghost's dress. Clara touched the fabric lightly. Ruth Brennan had worn this, she realized. The wife who died in a winter like this one. Silas had kept her things all these years. She dressed quickly, fed Nettie from another bottle of goat's milk she found waiting outside the door, and carried the baby down the hallway toward the sounds of life. The kitchen was bright with morning sun. Silas stood at the stove, his back to her, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. And sitting at the table, swinging his legs too short to reach the floor, was a boy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. A smear of jam colored his chin. When he saw Clara, his face split into a wide grin. "Papa, she's awake." Silas turned. His eyes moved over Clara, checking for what she didn't know. Injury. Fear flight. "You slept a long time," the boy announced. "Papa said not to wake you up 'cause you were real tired. Are you still tired? I'm Emmett. I'm 5 years old. Is that a baby? Can I see?" Clara couldn't help it. She smiled. "Her name's Nettie. She's 3 months old. Would you like to say hello?" Emmett scrambled down from his chair and crossed the room with the boundless energy of childhood. He stood on his tiptoes to peer at the baby in Clara's arms. "She's really small," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break her. "Is she going to get bigger?" "She is, if we take good care of her. I can help take care of her." Emmett looked up with solemn eyes. "I take care of the chickens, and they're real small too. Well, they were. They're bigger now 'cause I did a good job." Clara glanced at Silas. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. Something caught between caution and something softer. "Breakfast," he said gruffly, turning back to the stove. "Sit down. You need to eat." Clara settled into a chair at the table Nettie cradled in one arm. Emmett climbed back into his seat and resumed his assault on a plate of scrambled eggs. Silas set a bowl of oatmeal in front of Clara, along with a cup of black coffee. "It ain't much," he said. "It's more than I've had in days." Clara took a bite. The oatmeal was thick and warm, sweetened with honey. She had to stop herself from groaning. Emmett watched her eat with undisguised fascination. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Emmett," Silas began. "It's all right." Clara set down her spoon. "I came from a long way away, east of here near the Texas border. I had to walk through the snow to get here." "In the blizzard?" Emmett's eyes went huge. "Papa says the blizzard was the worst one in years. He says men die in blizzards like that." "Your papa's right. It was very dangerous, but I had to keep Nettie safe." "Why was something scary chasing you?" The question hit too close. Clara's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Emmett." Silas's voice was quiet but firm. "Finish your breakfast. Mrs. Winslow doesn't need to answer all your questions." "It's Miss," Clara said without thinking. "Not Mrs." Silas looked at her. She looked back. "But the baby," Emmett started. "Emmett, breakfast." The boy's mouth snapped shut. He shoveled eggs into his face with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been trained not to argue. Clara ate in silence, acutely aware of Silas's presence across the room. He didn't hover, didn't watch her with obvious concern. But she could feel his attention like warmth from the fire, steady, constant waiting. When she finished, she stood to take her bowl to the wash basin. "Leave it," Silas said. "You're still weak. Rest." "I've rested. I need to do something. Please." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I can't just sit here and let you take care of me like I'm helpless." Silas studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Dishes, then. But that's all." Clara washed the breakfast dishes while Nettie slept in a makeshift cradle Silas had pulled from somewhere, a wooden box lined with blankets set near the warmth of the stove. Emmett helped dry, chattering the whole time about chickens and snowmen, and the wolf he was certain he'd heard howling last night. Clara listened, nodded, asked questions that made the boy light up. She hadn't felt this normal in months. The days began to blur together. Clara healed slowly, her feet first, then her hands, then the bone-deep exhaustion that had followed her from the house she'd fled. Nettie grew stronger too, her cries louder, her appetite fierce. The goat's milk sustained her until Clara's own supply returned. Silas said little, but he did much. He fixed the window that leaked cold air into Clara's room. He brought in extra firewood without being asked. He left a jar of salve beside her bed one morning for her cracked skin, she assumed, and never mentioned it again. Each small act was a sentence he couldn't say. Clara learned to read them like letters on a page. Emmett, meanwhile, attached himself to Clara like a shadow. "Can I help you feed Nettie? Can I show you my horse? He's made of wood. Papa carved him. Can you read me a story? Papa tries, but he does the voices wrong." Clara read to him every evening while Nettie nursed. She did the voices exaggerated, silly, full of drama. Emmett laughed until he couldn't breathe. Once she caught Silas watching from the doorway, his expression unguarded for just a moment. He looked like a man witnessing something he'd thought was lost. On the 6th day, Silas came in from the barn with a look on his face that made Clara's stomach drop. "What is it?" He pulled off his gloves slowly. "Rider coming up the valley. Couldn't see who. Too far off." Clara's hand flew to her throat. It might be anyone. Silas crossed to the fireplace and pulled down the rifle mounted above it. He checked the chamber, loaded around, set it back. Probably just a traveler looking for shelter. "But if it's... then I'll deal with it." Clara stared at him. "You don't even know who's after me. I haven't told you anything." "You don't need to." He met her eyes. "Whatever you're running from, whoever's chasing you, it don't matter. You're under my roof now. That makes you mine to protect." The words hit her somewhere deep. "Silas." "Get Emmett. Take him and the baby to the back room. Stay there until I come for you." Clara didn't argue. She scooped up. Nettie took Emmett's hand and hurried down the hall. Behind her, she heard the front door open and close. Emmett looked up at her with wide eyes. "Is something bad happening?" Clara knelt to his level, holding Nettie close to her chest. "I don't know, sweetheart. But your papa's going to keep us safe. He's the strongest man I know. You trust him, don't you?" Emmett nodded seriously. "Papa's not scared of anything." "Then we won't be scared either." They waited. The rider was not Virgil. Clara learned this when Silas returned 20 minutes later, shoulders looser, rifle still in hand, but pointed at the floor. "Neighbor from 3 valleys over," he said. "Checking to see if we survived the storm." Clara's relief was so intense she had to sit down. "Thank God." Silas hung the rifle back above the fireplace. He won't give up, though. The man you're running from. He'll come eventually. Clara closed her eyes. His name is Virgil Harkins. We were married for 2 years. He was... She struggled to find the words. He was charming at first. Everyone loved him. I thought I'd found something good. Silas said nothing, just listened. After Nettie was born, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He drank. He got angry. He blamed me for everything. His failures, his debts, the fact that I'd given him a daughter instead of a son. Her voice dropped to a whisper. One night during a storm, just like the one that brought me here, Nettie was crying. She'd been colicky for days. Virgil couldn't stand the noise anymore. He picked her up and walked to the front door, opened it, said maybe the cold would teach her to be quiet. Silas's hand curled into a fist at his side. I got there in time, Clara continued. Grabbed her from him and ran. Didn't stop until I was miles away. I've been walking ever since. The fire crackled. Silas's voice when he spoke was rough. He touches you or that baby again, I'll kill him. Clara looked up, startled by the certainty in his tone. You don't owe me that. Ain't about owing. He met her eyes. It's about what's right. Clara had spent her whole marriage being told she was wrong for speaking up, wrong for fighting back, wrong for wanting more than Virgil was willing to give. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her instead of against her. Thank you, she said. Silas nodded once. Outside, the sun was setting. Another day had passed in this small cabin at the edge of the world, and Clara Winslow, for the first time since she'd run into the snow, allowed herself to hope. That night, after Emmett was asleep and Nettie had been fed, Clara sat by the fire with Silas. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people have stopped pretending they don't understand each other. Finally, Clara broke it. What was she like, Ruth? Silas stared into the flames. She was stubborn, he said, hard-headed. Used to argue with me about everything, where to put the fence, how to raise the chickens, whether the barn door should swing in or out. A faint smile crossed his face. She was also the kindest person I ever knew. She'd give her last scrap of bread to a stranger, sit up all night with a sick calf, sing Emmett to sleep even when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. She sounds wonderful. She was. Silas's voice caught, and then she was gone, and I didn't know how to be anything without her. Clara reached out and touched his hand. He flinched like a man unused to gentleness, but he didn't pull away. You've done a good job, Clara said softly. With Emmett, with all of this. Ruth would be proud. Silas turned his hand over beneath hers. His fingers were rough, calloused, strong. You should rest, he said quietly. Long day tomorrow. Clara nodded, but as she walked down the hallway to her room, she felt his eyes follow her, and she knew with sudden certainty that whatever happened next, Virgil the law, the judgment of the town, she wasn't facing it alone. Not anymore. The second week brought a rhythm Clara hadn't expected to find. She woke each morning before dawn, fed Nettie in the quiet darkness, then dressed in Ruth's old clothes, and made her way to the kitchen. Silas was always there already. Coffee brewing fire stoked his back to the door as he stared out the frosted window at a world still buried in white. They didn't speak much in those early hours. Didn't need to. Clara would pour herself a cup settle into the chair nearest the stove and simply exist in the same space as him. It was enough. Emmett would barrel out of his room an hour later, all noise and energy and endless questions. The boy had decided Clara was the most fascinating creature he'd ever encountered, and he followed her everywhere, helping her fold laundry, watching her feed Nettie, asking her to explain things his father never talked about. Why do ladies wear their hair up like that? How come babies can't eat regular food? Did you ever see a real Indian papa? Says they used to live all around here before we came. Clara answered patiently, honestly, sometimes making things up when she didn't know the truth. Emmett didn't seem to mind. He just wanted someone to talk to. On the 9th day, Clara found herself alone with Silas for the first time since that night by the fire. Emmett had fallen asleep after lunch, worn out from building snow forts in the yard. Nettie was napping in her cradle. The house was quiet, except for the pop and settle of burning logs. Clara stood at the window, watching the icicles drip in the afternoon sun. The thaw was coming. She could feel it in the air, smell it in the earth beginning to soften beneath the snow. "Storm's breaking," Silas said from behind her. She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with that steady gaze she was beginning to know too well. "That's good," Clara said. "Isn't it?" "Depends." He pushed off the frame and crossed to the window, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Roads'll be passable soon. Means supplies can get through. Also means other things can get through." Clara's stomach tightened. "You mean Virgil?" "I mean anyone looking for a woman who disappeared in a blizzard." Silas's jaw clenched. "Word travels in these parts. Might already be people talking." "I should leave." The words came out before Clara could stop them. "Before I bring trouble to your door. You and Emmett have been so kind, but I can't ask you to—" "You ain't asking." Silas turned to face her. "And you ain't leaving." Clara stared at him. "You can't just decide that." "Already did." "Silas, you walk out that door where you gonna go." His voice was rough but not angry. Something else lived beneath the words. Something that sounded almost like fear. "Back into the snow. Another town where they'll slam doors in your face. How far you think you'll get before he finds you?" Clara's eyes burned. "That's not your problem." "It is now." Silas stepped closer. "You came to my door. You put your baby in my arms. You sat at my table and ate my food and slept under my roof. That makes it my problem." "Why?" Clara's voice cracked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. His eyes searched her face, looking for something she couldn't name. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally. "To be alone. To have nobody standing between you and the worst thing that could happen." He swallowed. "When Ruth died, I thought about walking into the snow myself. Just ending it. The only thing that stopped me was Emmett. That boy needed me, and I couldn't leave him alone in the world." Clara's breath caught. "You got someone who needs you too." Silas continued. "That little girl in there, she's got nobody else. You die, she dies. You understand? So you don't get to give up. You don't get to walk away. Not anymore." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I've been running for so long. I don't know how to stop." Silas reached out. His hand, rough, calloused, trembling, slightly cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear. "Then let me carry it for a while," he said quietly. "Whatever weight you're holding, let me help." Clara closed her eyes, leaned into his touch, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself be held. Not physically. Silas didn't pull her into his arms, didn't cross that line, but his hand stayed on her face, warm and steady, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. A wall she'd built brick by brick night after night, crumbling into dust. When she opened her eyes, Silas was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Soft, open, vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Trust someone. Depend on someone. Every time I have, it's ended badly." "I ain't him." Silas's voice was fierce. "I ain't never gonna be him. You understand?" "I know." Clara placed her hand over his, pressing his palm harder against her cheek. "I know you're not. That's what scares me." Silas's brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because if I let myself believe you're different and you're not." She shook her head. "I don't think I could survive that. Not again." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back, letting his hand fall. "I'm going to show you something," he said. "Come with me." He led her through the kitchen, past Emmett's closed door to a room at the very back of the house. Clara had never been inside. The door was always shut, and she'd assumed it was storage, or perhaps a workshop. Silas pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked it. Inside was a nursery. The walls were painted pale yellow, faded now with age. A wooden crib stood against one wall, hand-carved with delicate scrollwork. A rocking chair sat in the corner, draped with a small quilt. Toys lined a shelf, wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit with one button eye, a music box with a dancing ballerina on top. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. "Ruth started this before Emmett was born," Silas said. His voice was distant, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. "She wanted everything perfect. Spent months sewing that quilt, picking out the furniture. She was so happy." Clara's throat ached. "After she died, I couldn't come in here. Couldn't even look at it. I just locked the door and pretended it didn't exist." Silas walked to the crib and ran his fingers along the edge. "4 years and I ain't touched a thing. Couldn't bring myself to pack it up, but couldn't stand to see it neither." He turned to face Clara. "I'm showing you this because I need you to understand something. I ain't a good man. I ain't whole. I got pieces missing that I don't know how to get back." He took a breath. "But I'm trying. Every day I'm trying to be someone worth knowing. Someone Emmett can be proud of. And lately—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Lately I've been trying to be someone you could trust." Clara crossed the room. She stopped in front of him close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the faint scar on his jaw, the way his pulse jumped at his throat. "I do trust you," she said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. I trust you, and it terrifies me because the last man I trusted almost killed my daughter." Silas's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I would never—" "I know." Clara reached up and touched his chest right over his heart. She could feel it beating fast beneath her palm. "I know you wouldn't. That's why I'm still here. That's why I haven't run." They stood there frozen in the dusty nursery, surrounded by ghosts and memories and the fragile hope of something new. Then Silas covered her hand with his. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. "Not just until the storm passes. Not just until it's safe to travel. Stay." Clara's breath hitched. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." His grip tightened. "I'm asking you to let me be your home. You and Nettie. Let me give you what that bastard never could." Tears slipped down Clara's face. She couldn't stop them, didn't try. "What about the town?" she whispered. "They'll talk. An unmarried woman living with a widower. They'll say things. Let them talk. And if Virgil comes, if he brings the law—" Silas's jaw set. "Then I'll handle it. How he has money connections. His family owns half of Texas. I don't care if his family owns the whole damn country." Silas stepped closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "He ain't taking you. He ain't taking that baby. Not while I'm breathing." Clara closed her eyes. For 2 years, she had fought alone, run alone, survived alone. The weight of it had nearly crushed her, worn her down to bone and desperation. Now, here was this man, this quiet, broken, stubborn man, offering to carry that weight with her. Not for her. With her. "Okay," she breathed. Silas pulled back slightly. "Okay." Clara opened her eyes, met his gaze. "Okay, I'll stay." Something shifted in Silas's expression. The tension in his shoulders released. His hand, still covering hers against his chest, trembled slightly. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. Clara almost laughed. "You're thanking me. You're the one who's— You're giving me a reason." Silas interrupted. "To keep going. To be better. You and Emmett. And that little girl in there, you're giving me a reason to believe things can be different. That I don't have to spend the rest of my life alone in this house waiting to die." Clara's heart cracked open. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek. Just briefly. Just enough. When she pulled back, Silas's eyes were closed, his breath unsteady. "We should go," Clara said softly, "before Emmett wakes up and finds us missing." Silas nodded, but he didn't move. Neither did she. They stood in the dusty nursery, hands still clasped, hearts still racing, while somewhere beyond the frosted windows, the world continued to thaw. 3 days later, the first rider arrived. Clara was in the kitchen helping Emmett practice his letters at the table when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her whole body went rigid. Silas appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met. "Stay here," he said. He grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace and walked out the front door. Clara pulled Emmett close, one hand pressed over his mouth to keep him quiet. Through the window, she watched Silas cross the yard to meet the rider. It was a woman. Clara's breath released in a rush. The woman was older, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She sat straight in the saddle despite the cold, her face weathered but sharp. When she spoke, her voice carried across the yard. "Silas Brennan. Been a while." Silas didn't lower the rifle. "Mrs. Whitmore, what brings you out this way? Heard you had company." The woman's eyes flicked toward the house. "Word travels fast when strangers show up in these parts, especially pretty ones with babies and no husbands." Clara's stomach dropped. Silas's grip on the rifle tightened. "What people say ain't none of your concern." "It is when they're saying it in my store." Mrs. Whitmore dismounted, moving with surprising agility for her age. "I ain't here to make trouble, Silas. I'm here to see for myself what kind of woman would walk through a blizzard with an infant." She started toward the house. Silas stepped into her path. "She ain't receiving visitors." "She will receive me." Mrs. Whitmore's voice was iron. "Or the whole town will keep wondering, and wondering leads to talking, and talking leads to trouble. You want trouble, Silas, or you want this handled proper?" A long silence. Then Silas lowered the rifle. "5 minutes," he said. "And you upset her, you leave. Understood." Mrs. Whitmore nodded curtly and walked past him toward the porch. Clara barely had time to compose herself before the front door opened. She stood Emmett clinging to her skirt, Nettie stirring in her cradle nearby. Mrs. Whitmore stopped in the doorway. Her eyes swept over Clara, the borrowed dress, the healing cuts on her hands, the shadows under her eyes. "So you're the one," she said. Clara lifted her chin. "I'm Clara Winslow. This is my daughter Nettie. I know who you are. What I want to know is why you're here." Mrs. Whitmore crossed to the cradle and looked down at the sleeping baby. Her expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her gaze. "She's small. She was born early, and the cold nearly took her. But it didn't." Mrs. Whitmore straightened. "You kept her alive. Through a blizzard. Alone." "I did what any mother would do." "No." The older woman's voice was sharp. "Most mothers would have given up, would have laid down in the snow and waited for the end. You didn't. That tells me something about you, Clara Winslow." Clara didn't know how to respond. Mrs. Whitmore studied her for another long moment. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Bread," she said, setting it on the table. "And some cheese. You're too thin, and thin mothers make thin milk." Clara stared at the offering. "I don't understand." "I had a daughter once." Mrs. Whitmore's voice went quiet. "She married a man who seemed fine enough at the start, charming, handsome. Everyone said she was lucky." She paused. "She died 3 years later. He said she fell down the stairs. But I knew. I knew what he'd done, and I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't save her." Clara's eyes burned. I see the same look in your eyes that I saw in hers, Mrs. Whitmore continued. The look of a woman who's been running so long she's forgotten how to stand still. The look of a woman who's been hurt by someone who was supposed to protect her. She stepped closer. I don't know your whole story, and I don't need to. What I know is this: you made it here. You survived. And if Silas Brennan is willing to give you shelter, then you've already got one person in your corner. Her jaw tightened. Now you've got two. Clara couldn't speak. The tears came too fast. Mrs. Whitmore reached out and gripped her shoulder, not gently but firmly. Steadying. The town will talk. Let them. They talked about me for years after I buried my husband. Said I was cold. Said I drove him to drink. Said I was unnatural because I didn't weep at his grave. She smiled grimly. I stopped caring what they said a long time ago. You should do the same. She released Clara's shoulder and turned toward the door. Mrs. Whitmore, Clara called. The older woman paused. Thank you. Mrs. Whitmore didn't turn around. Thank me when you're still standing a year from now. She walked out. Through the window, Clara watched her mount her horse and exchange a few words with Silas. He nodded once. She nodded back. Then she rode away, disappearing into the white landscape like she'd never been there at all. Silas came back inside. His eyes found Clara immediately. You okay? Clara wiped her face. I think so. What did she say? Clara looked at the bundle on the table. The bread, the cheese, the unexpected kindness of a woman she'd never met. She said, I have two people in my corner now. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room and pulled Clara into his arms. She stiffened at first, old instincts, old fears, but his hold was gentle, protective, not possessive. 3, he said against her hair. You've got 3. Clara closed her eyes and let herself be held. In the corner, Emmett watched them with a small smile on his face. And in her cradle, Nettie slept on, dreaming whatever dreams infants dream. The days grew longer as winter loosened its grip. Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of the ranch in ways she hadn't expected. She learned to milk the goat, collect eggs from the chickens, mend clothes by firelight. She learned which floorboards creaked and which doors stuck. She learned that Emmett liked his eggs scrambled, but hated them fried, that Silas took his coffee black and bitter, that the rooster crowed exactly 12 minutes before sunrise every single day. She learned, too, how to exist in the space between fear and hope. Virgil was still out there. She knew it in her bones. He wasn't the type to let her go, not because he loved her, but because he owned her. In his mind, she was property that had been stolen, and he would want her back simply to prove that he could take her. But for now, in this small cabin at the edge of the valley, Clara allowed herself to breathe. One evening, after Emmett had been put to bed and Nettie was nursing drowsily in Clara's arms, Silas sat down across from her by the fire. I need to tell you something, he said. Clara's heart stuttered. What is it? I rode into town today, while you and Emmett were napping. He stared into the flames. Wanted to see what people were saying. Clara's grip on Nettie tightened. And there's a man been asking questions. Showed up 2 days ago staying at the boarding house. Tall, well-dressed, asking about a woman who might have passed through during the storm. Silas's jaw clenched. Asking about a baby. Clara's blood turned to ice. It's him, she whispered. Virgil. He found me. Silas looked at her. His eyes were hard, but not with anger, with determination. He found the town, he said. He ain't found you. Not yet. But he will. He always does. He'll offer money, make threats, whatever it takes. And then he'll come here and... Clara. Silas reached out and gripped her hand. Look at me. She did. Through tears, through terror, she looked at him. He ain't taking you, Silas said. I don't care who he is or what he's got. He sets foot on my land, he won't leave it standing. You could get hurt. Emmett could get hurt. I can't. You ain't running anymore. His voice was fierce. You hear me? You ran far enough. You found something worth staying for. You don't give that up just because some bastard thinks he can take it. Clara's tears spilled over. I don't want you to die for me. I ain't dying. Silas squeezed her hand. And neither are you. We're going to face this together, and we're going to win. Because that's what families do. Families. The word hit Clara like a thunderbolt. Silas seemed to realize what he'd said. His grip loosened, slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. I mean, don't. Clara shook her head. Don't take it back. Clara, we are a family. She looked down at Nettie, at the tiny fingers curled against her chest, then back at Silas. You, me, Emmett, Nettie. Maybe not by blood, maybe not by law, but by choice. That's what matters. That's what's real. Silas's breath caught. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Then Silas rose, crossed to Clara's chair, and knelt in front of her. I want to marry you, he said. Clara's heart stopped. Not because of him, not because of what people will say. Because He stopped, swallowed, tried again. Because I wake up every morning thankful you're here. Because Emmett laughs more than he has in years. Because when I look at you and that baby, I see everything I thought I'd lost. His hand found hers again. I know it's too soon. I know you've got no reason to trust me or any man, but I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance to prove I'm worth it. Give me a lifetime to show you what love is supposed to look like. Clara couldn't breathe. She thought of Virgil, the charming smile, the pretty words, the promises that had turned to poison. She thought of every bruise, every insult, every night she'd lain awake wondering if she would survive until morning. Then she thought of Silas, the silent rancher who had wrapped his coat around her in the snow, who had held her baby against his chest to warm her, who had fixed windows and left salve and never asked for anything in return. 2 men, 2 proposals, worlds apart. Yes, Clara whispered. Silas blinked. What? Yes. Louder now. Certain. I'll marry you. His face transformed. The hard lines softened. His eyes, usually so guarded, shone with something that looked like wonder. You mean it? I mean it. Clara leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. I want to be your wife. I want Emmett to be my son. I want us to raise Nettie together in this house and build something neither of us ever thought we'd have again. Silas's hands came up to cup her face. I won't let you down, he said hoarsely. I swear to God, Clara, I won't. She kissed him. Not on the cheek this time. On the mouth. Softly, tentatively, like a question she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. He answered. His lips moved against hers, gentle but certain. His hand slid into her hair. He kissed her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Well, Clara said shakily, I suppose that settles it. Silas laughed, a real laugh rusty from disuse, but genuine. It was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. I suppose it does. In her arms, Nettie stirred and let out a small coo, as if offering her approval. And somewhere in the back room, unbeknownst to either of them, Emmett lay awake in his bed, having heard everything. He was smiling. The next morning came with pale sunshine and the sound of melting snow dripping from the eaves. Clara woke to find Silas already gone from the house. His boots were missing from beside the door, and through the window she could see him in the yard chopping wood with powerful rhythmic strokes. She watched him for a moment, this man who had promised to be her husband. This man who had looked at her like she was worth something. The fear was still there, she didn't think it would ever fully leave, but something else had joined it now. Hope. Emmett bounded into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Is it true?" he demanded without preamble. "Are you going to marry Papa? Are you going to be my new mama?" Clara knelt to his level. "You heard us last night." "I wasn't spying," Emmett said quickly. I couldn't sleep, and I heard voices, and it's okay." Clara took his hands. "Yes, it's true. Your papa asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Emmett's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? Really truly?" "Really truly." The boy threw his arms around her neck with such force that Clara nearly toppled backward. She caught herself on one hand and hugged him back, laughing. "I always wanted a mama." Emmett mumbled against her shoulder. "Papa tried real hard, but he can't do the voices right when he reads stories. And he burns the biscuits. And he never remembers to tuck the blanket under my feet like you do." Clara's eyes stung. "Well, I'll be here now, to do the voices and save the biscuits and tuck your feet in every single night." Emmett pulled back his face serious. "You promise you're not gonna leave?" The question cut deep. This child had already lost one mother. The fear of losing another was written all over his face. "I promise," Clara said. "I'm not going anywhere." Emmett studied her for a long moment, as if checking for lies. Then he nodded solemnly. "Okay, can we have pancakes?" Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. "Yes, we can have pancakes." Outside, the thaw continued, and somewhere beyond the valley, a well-dressed man with cold eyes was making his way closer. The pancakes were still warm on the table when the knock came. Clara froze, spatula in hand. Emmett looked up from his plate mouth, full eyes suddenly wide. In her cradle by the stove, Nettie stirred but didn't wake. Another knock. Harder this time. Silas appeared in the doorway from outside, wood chips still clinging to his shirt. His eyes met Clara's, and in that single glance, 1,000 words passed between them. "Take Emmett to the back," he said quietly. "Now." Clara didn't argue. She set down the spatula, scooped Nettie from the cradle, and reached for Emmett's hand. "But I didn't finish my pancakes," the boy protested. "Later, sweetheart. Come with me." Something in her voice must have warned him. Emmett slid off his chair without another word and followed Clara down the hallway. She heard Silas cross to the fireplace, heard the familiar sound of the rifle being lifted from its mount. Then the front door opened. Clara pressed herself against the wall of the back room. Emmett tucked behind her, Nettie clutched to her chest. She strained to hear the voices drifting from the front of the house. "Mr. Brennan, I presume?" A man's voice. Smooth. Cultured. Wrong. Clara's blood turned to ice. "Virgil." "Who's asking?" Silas's voice was flat. Dangerous. "My name is Virgil Harkins. I believe you have something that belongs to me." A long pause. Clara could picture Silas standing in the doorway, rifle in hand, blocking the entrance with his body. "I don't know any Harkins," Silas said. "No, I don't suppose you would. We've never met." Virgil's tone remained pleasant conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "But I've been searching for my wife and daughter for quite some time now. A woman matching her description was seen heading toward this valley during the storm. You can understand my concern." "Your wife, you say?" "Clara. Clara Harkins. Brown hair, blue eyes, about yea-high." A pause. "And our infant daughter, Annette. They went missing several weeks ago. I've been out of my mind with worry." Clara's hands shook. The lies rolled off Virgil's tongue like honey sweet and poisonous. "Ain't seen any woman matching that description," Silas said. "Are you certain? Perhaps she stopped by for supplies, a meal? Any information would be helpful." Virgil's voice dropped, becoming confidential. "I'm prepared to offer a substantial reward for her safe return. My family has means, Mr. Brennan. We take care of those who help us." Another pause. Longer this time. I told you, Silas said slowly. I ain't seen her. Virgil didn't sound convinced. This is a remote property, isolated, the kind of place a woman might run to if she were confused, unwell. Unwell. My wife suffers from hysteria, I'm afraid. It happens sometimes after childbirth. She gets these ideas in her head, becomes paranoid, starts making accusations. The doctors warned me it might come to this. Virgil sighed heavily. I just want to bring her home. Get her the help she needs. Surely you can understand that. Clara bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. Hysteria. Accusations. He was laying the groundwork, building a story that would make her seem mad and him the concerned husband, just like he always did. Can't help you, Silas said. Now get off my property. A beat of silence. I see. Virgil's voice had changed. The pleasant veneer cracked, revealing something harder underneath. That's unfortunate, Mr. Brennan. Truly. Because I know she's here. The shopkeeper in town told me all about the woman staying at your ranch. The woman with the baby who appeared out of nowhere during the blizzard. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Mrs. Whitmore also told me, Virgil continued, that you've been keeping her hidden, protecting her. How noble. His voice turned mocking. Tell me, is she warming your bed already? Is that why you're lying to me? The sound of the rifle cocking was loud in the silence. You've got about 3 seconds to get on your horse, Silas said, his voice deadly calm, before I put a hole in you. Threatening me won't help her. Virgil's composure didn't waver. I have the law on my side, Mr. Brennan. Clara is my legal wife. That child is my legal daughter. Whatever story she's told you, whatever lies she's spun, it doesn't change the facts. She belongs to me. Nobody belongs to anybody. How quaint, how rustic. Virgil laughed a cold sound. But you're wrong. The law says differently. And when I come back with the sheriff and a court order, you'll have no choice but to hand her over. Unless, of course, you'd like to add obstructing justice to your list of troubles. Silence. Then footsteps, moving away from the door. I'll give you 1 day, Virgil called. 1 day to think about it, to convince her to come peacefully. It'll be better for everyone that way, especially the child. I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen in the course of a legal dispute. The sound of a horse whickering, hooves on frozen ground, fading into the distance. Clara slumped against the wall, her whole body trembling. Silas appeared in the doorway of the back room a moment later. His face was tight, his jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping. He's gone, he said. Clara couldn't speak. The tears came instead, hot and angry and terrified. Silas crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her. She leaned into him, Nettie pressed between them and let the sobs come. He's going to take her, she choked out. He's going to take my baby, and there's nothing I can do. That ain't gonna happen. You heard him. He has the law. He has money. He has... I don't care what he has. Silas pulled back and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me, Clara. Listen. He ain't taking you. He ain't taking Nettie. I won't allow it. How? Clara's voice cracked. How are you going to stop him? He'll bring the sheriff. He'll bring lawyers. He'll tell everyone I'm crazy, and they'll believe him because he's rich and charming, and I'm just a woman who ran away from her husband. Silas's grip tightened. Then we tell them the truth. The truth doesn't matter. Don't you understand? I tried telling the truth. I told his mother what he did, and she said I was exaggerating. I told the pastor, and he said marriage was sacred, and I needed to pray harder. I told everyone, and nobody believed me. She was shaking now, the memories rising up like ghosts. They never believed the woman. They always believed the man. Emmett's small voice came from behind her. I believe you. Clara turned. The boy stood in the corner of the room, his face pale but determined. He walked forward and slipped his hand into hers. I believe you, Mama. That man is bad, I could tell. His voice was all wrong, like when Papa's horse gets scared. all smooth on top but shaky underneath. Clara's tears spilled over anew. She knelt and pulled Emmett into her arms, holding him tight. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you." Silas placed his hand on Emmett's shoulder, the three of them forming a small circle of warmth in the cold back room. "We need a plan," Silas said. "We've got one day. Let's use it." The rest of that morning was spent in grim preparation. Silas rode to the Whitmore store, while Clara stayed behind with the children, the rifle within arm's reach at all times. When he returned 2 hours later, his expression was dark. "What happened?" Clara asked. Mrs. Whitmore didn't tell him anything willingly. Silas hung his hat on the hook by the door. She said he came into the store throwing money around, asking questions, making threats. When that didn't work, he started charming people, bought drinks at the saloon, told everyone his poor wife had been abducted by a madman. And they believed him. Some did, some didn't. Silas crossed to the window and looked out. Trouble is, he's got papers, a marriage certificate, a birth record with his name on it, all official and legal. Clara sank into a chair. "So it's hopeless." "I didn't say that." Silas turned to face her. "Mrs. Whitmore's spreading the word about what she saw when she came here. How thin you were. How scared. How your hands shook when you talked about him. She's telling people what her own daughter went through before she died. And they're listening. Some are." Silas pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "She also gave me this." Clara took it with trembling hands. It was a letter addressed to someone named Judge Wheeler in Austin. "Her husband's cousin," Silas explained. "He's a district judge. Mrs. Whitmore says if we can get this to him, he might be able to help. Issue an injunction or something, at least buy us time. Austin's 3 days' ride from here." "I know." Silas's jaw tightened. "But I'll make it in 2. Clara's head snapped up. "You're leaving." "I have to. If that letter can help." "And what happens when Virgil comes back with the sheriff? What happens when he finds you gone and me alone?" "You won't be alone. I'll ask Mrs. Whitmore to stay here, and I'll leave you the rifle." "I can't shoot a rifle." "Then I'll teach you." Clara stared at him. "Silas, this is madness. You can't just— What's the alternative?" His voice was sharp, more frustrated than angry. "We sit here and wait for him to show up with the law. We let them drag you off without a fight. I won't do that, Clara. I won't stand by and watch them take you." Nettie began to cry, startled by the raised voices. Clara lifted her from the cradle and bounced her gently, her mind racing. "There has to be another way," she said. "If you can think of one, I'm listening." She couldn't. That was the terrible truth. Virgil had all the power, the money, the connections, the law itself on his side. All Clara had was a borrowed dress and a man she'd known for barely 3 weeks. But that man was willing to ride for 2 days through frozen wilderness to save her. That had to count for something. "Okay," she said finally. "Go. But promise me you'll come back." Silas crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." He kissed her forehead, then Nettie's. Then he turned and walked out the door. Clara watched him saddle his horse through the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. He looked back once, raising a hand in farewell. She pressed her palm to the glass. Then he was gone, disappearing into the white expanse like a ghost. Mrs. Whitmore arrived that afternoon. She brought a basket of food, a shotgun of her own, and an expression that suggested she was looking forward to any trouble that might come her way. "Used to shoot coyotes off my land every spring," she said, matter-of-factly propping the shotgun by the door. "A man's bigger, but he's not faster." Clara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The first night passed without incident. Clara slept fitfully, Nettie tucked against her chest, one ear listening for hoofbeats that never came. Mrs. Whitmore took the rocking chair by the fire, her shotgun across her lap, and somehow managed to doze while looking like she could wake and shoot in the same heartbeat. Emmett asked 100 questions about where his father had gone and when he'd be back. Clara answered as honestly as she could, which wasn't very. She didn't know when Silas would return. She didn't know if the letter would help. She didn't know anything except that time was running out. The second day dawned gray and cold. Clara was washing dishes when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She dried her hands slowly, her heart climbing into her throat. Mrs. Whitmore. The older woman was already on her feet, shotgun in hand. I hear them. She crossed to the window and peered out. Her face went grim. 4 riders. One of them's wearing a badge. Clara's legs nearly buckled. Take the children to the back, Mrs. Whitmore said. I'll handle this. Agnes, you can't. I've handled worse than a couple of men with badges. The older woman's eyes were hard. Now go. Clara grabbed Nettie and reached for Emmett's hand. I want to stay, the boy said, his voice trembling but defiant. I want to help. You'll help by keeping your sister safe. Clara squeezed his fingers. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave? Emmett's chin wobbled, but he nodded. They hurried down the hallway, and Clara heard the front door open behind them. Gentlemen, Mrs. Whitmore's voice was cool as creek water. Something I can help you with. Clara pressed herself against the wall of the back room, the same position she'd held yesterday. But this time, there was no Silas. This time, she was truly alone. We're looking for a woman named Clara Harkins. A new voice, rough and official. The sheriff, presumably. Her husband's filed a complaint. Says she's being held here against her will. Does she look like she's being held against her will? Ma'am, I'm going to need to speak with her directly. She's not receiving visitors. This isn't a social call. The sheriff's patience was clearly thinning. Mr. Harkins has legal custody of his wife and child. If she doesn't come out willingly, I'm authorized to... Authorized by whom? Mrs. Whitmore interrupted. Some paper waved around by a man with money and a smooth tongue. Have you even looked into his claims? Ma'am, have you asked anyone in this town about the condition that woman was in when she arrived? Half-frozen, starving, begging for bread because she'd been walking for days through a blizzard? Does that sound like a woman running from a caring husband? A pause. Clara held her breath. The law is the law, the sheriff said finally. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Tom Baker. Mrs. Whitmore's voice dropped. Your sister made a choice when she came to my store with a black eye and asked me not to tell anyone. She chose to stay with that bastard because she thought she had no other option. And look what happened to her. Silence, heavy and sharp. That's different, the sheriff said quietly. Is it really? Mrs. Whitmore pressed. Look at that man, Tom. Really look at him. Look at his eyes. And tell me you don't see exactly what we all saw in Henry before it was too late. More silence. Then a new voice. Smooth, cultured wrong. Sheriff, I appreciate your colleague's concern, but this has gone on long enough. Virgil's patience had finally cracked. I've shown you the papers. I've explained the situation. My wife is mentally unwell and needs medical attention. Every moment we delay puts her and my daughter at risk. Mr. Harkins, I'm not asking for your permission. Virgil's voice hardened. I'm telling you to do your job, or I'll find a sheriff who will. The threat hung in the air. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could hardly hold Nettie. Then footsteps, coming down the hallway. No. Clara pressed Emmett behind her. No, please. The door swung open. Virgil stood in the frame. He looked exactly the same as the day she'd left. Handsome, well-groomed, impeccably dressed. His smile was the same, too, the one he used in public, all charm and warmth, hiding the coldness underneath. Hello, Clara. His voice was soft, almost tender. I've been looking everywhere for you. Clara's voice came out as a whisper. Don't what? Don't worry about my wife. Don't search for my missing child. He stepped into the room and Clara backed away until she hit the wall. You've led me on quite a chase, darling, halfway across Texas in the dead of winter. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? You're not worried about me. You never have been. Of course I have. You're my wife, the mother of my child. He glanced at Nettie, and something flickered in his eyes. Something that made Clara's skin crawl. Look at her. She's gotten so big. Have you been taking care of her properly? You know how fragile infants can be. Stay away from her. Virgil's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. Clara, let's not make this difficult. You're not well. The doctors explained it to me: postpartum hysteria delusions, paranoid fantasies. It's a medical condition, nothing to be ashamed of. He extended his hand. Come home with me. I'll get you the best care money can buy. Everything will go back to normal. Normal? Clara's voice cracked with bitter laughter. You mean the kind of normal where you throw things at my head, where you tell me I'm worthless every day, where you tried to leave our daughter in the snow to die? Virgil's expression flickered. She's confused, he said over his shoulder to someone in the hallway, the sheriff presumably. These are exactly the kinds of delusions I mentioned, completely divorced from reality. I am not delusional. Clara's voice rose. I know exactly what you are, what you've done, and I will never let you near my daughter again. Virgil's mask slipped. For just a moment, she saw the real him, the rage, the cruelty, the absolute conviction that she was his to control. Then the mask slid back into place. Sheriff, he said calmly, I need you to remove my wife from this property. She's clearly not thinking straight. Footsteps in the hallway. Clara clutched Nettie tighter, her body positioning itself between the baby and Virgil. I won't go, she said. I won't. You don't have a choice. Virgil stepped closer. You never did. His hand reached for her arm, and then a small body launched itself between them. Emmett. The boy stood in front of Clara. His little fists raised, his face twisted with fear and fury. Leave my mama alone. Virgil blinked. Who the hell is this? This is my house, and you're a bad man, and my papa's gonna come back and make you sorry. Virgil stared at the child for a long moment. Then he laughed, a genuine laugh full of contempt. This is precious. Really. You've been playing house with some rancher and his brat while I've been... He's not a brat. Clara's voice was steel. He's my son. Virgil's laughter died. Excuse me. You heard me. Clara straightened her spine. Emmett is my son. Silas Brennan is my husband. This is my home, and you have no claim to me or my daughter. We're not divorced, Clara. We're not even... Maybe not legally, but in every way that matters, I stopped being your wife the night you tried to murder our child. The words hung in the air. In the hallway, someone drew a sharp breath. Virgil's face went pale, then red. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You lying little... I'm not lying. Clara met his gaze without flinching. And I think the sheriff knows it, don't you? Sheriff Baker. A long pause. Then the sheriff's voice from somewhere behind Virgil. Mr. Harkins, I think maybe we should step outside. What? I said, I think we should step outside, talk this through. Virgil spun around. You can't be serious. She just admitted to abandoning our marriage, to kidnapping my daughter. And you want to talk? I want to hear both sides, properly. The sheriff's voice had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by something harder. Mrs. Whitmore raised some points that I'd like to address. And I'd like to speak with Miss Winslow. Alone. Absolutely not. I won't have you. Mr. Harkins. The sheriff stepped into view, his hand resting on his belt. I'm asking you nicely. Step outside. Let me do my job. Virgil's jaw worked. For a terrible moment, Clara thought he might refuse, might do something violent. She'd seen that look before, the moment right before he snapped. But there were witnesses now. Too many to charm, too many to buy. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. 5 minutes, then I'm taking what's mine. He turned and stalked out of the room, brushing past the sheriff with barely controlled fury. Clara's knees gave out. She slid down the wall, still clutching Nettie, and suddenly Emmett was there, his arms around her neck, his tears soaking her shoulder. "You did it, Mama. You were so brave, just like in the stories." Clara held him tight and cried. The sheriff entered the room slowly, hat in hand. He was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a jaw that suggested he'd been clenching it for years. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about all that. Can we talk?" Clara wiped her eyes and nodded. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her, leaving plenty of space between them. "Tell me what happened. The real story. From the beginning." So Clara told him. Everything. The courtship, the wedding, the slow transformation from charming husband to controlling monster, the isolation, the insults, the escalating violence. The night of the storm, when Virgil had stood at the open door with Nettie in his arms and suggested the cold might teach her to be quiet. The sheriff listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You got anyone who can verify any of this? Anyone who saw the bruises, heard the threats?" Clara's heart sank. "No. He was always careful. And his family, they have money, influence. Nobody wanted to cross them." "What about here? Anyone see your condition when you arrived?" "Mrs. Whitmore, and Silas Brennan. He found me on his porch, half frozen, begging for bread because I couldn't feed my baby." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "Where's Brennan now?" "He rode to Austin, to deliver a letter to a judge who might be able to help." "Judge Wheeler. You know him. Know of him." The sheriff stood. "Good man, fair. If anyone can sort this mess out, it's him." "So what happens now?" The sheriff put his hat back on. "What happens now is I tell Mr. Harkins that I need more time to investigate. That I can't remove a woman and child from a home without being damn sure I'm doing the right thing. He won't accept that. He don't have a choice." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "I made a mistake once. Let a man take his wife home because he had papers and a nice smile. Found her at the bottom of the stairs 3 months later." He shook his head. "I ain't making that mistake again." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He headed for the door. "This ain't over. He's got money and connections, like you said. He'll come back with lawyers, maybe even a state marshal. Best I can do is buy you time." "How much time?" "Few days. Maybe a week if I'm lucky." He paused in the doorway. "Better hope your man gets to Austin fast." He tipped his hat and was gone. Clara sat in the silence, Nettie sleeping in her arms, Emmett's hand in hers. A few days, maybe a week. Please, she thought. Please let Silas make it in time. Outside she heard raised voices. Virgil arguing with the sheriff, his smooth veneer finally cracking in public. Mrs. Whitmore's sharp responses. The murmur of other townspeople who had gathered to watch. Clara didn't move. She stayed in that back room holding her children and waited for whatever came next. Night fell. The riders left. Virgil among them, his fury barely contained. Mrs. Whitmore made soup and forced Clara to eat. Emmett fell asleep with his head in Clara's lap. Nettie nursed and gurgled and slept and woke oblivious to the storm swirling around her. Clara sat by the window watching the road, waiting, praying. The hours crawled past like wounded animals, and somewhere in the darkness, miles away, a lone rider pushed his horse harder, coming home. 3 days passed like 3 years. Clara barely slept. Every sound made her jump: the creak of settling wood, the wind against the windows, the distant cry of a coyote. She kept the rifle within arm's reach at all times, though she'd only practiced shooting it twice under Mrs. Whitmore's watchful eye. Her aim was terrible, but the older woman said that didn't matter much. Most men run when they see a woman with a gun pointed at their chest, Mrs. Whitmore had said. They ain't expecting it. Use that." Emmett had grown quiet. The cheerful, chattering boy, who'd asked 100 questions a day, now spent hours staring out the window, watching for his father. He'd stopped asking when Silas would return. The silence was worse than the questions. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara was feeding Nettie by the fire when she heard hoofbeats. Her whole body went rigid. Agnes. Mrs. Whitmore was already moving shotgun in hand, positioning herself by the window. "Single rider," she said. "Coming fast." Clara's heart hammered. Virgil. The sheriff. Someone worse. Then Mrs. Whitmore's posture changed. The tension in her shoulders released. "It's Brennan." Clara nearly dropped Nettie. She thrust the baby into Mrs. Whitmore's arms and ran for the door, throwing it open, just as Silas pulled his horse to a stop in the yard. He was covered in dust and sweat, his face gaunt from days of hard riding. But he was alive. He was here. Clara flew down the porch steps and crashed into him before he'd even fully dismounted. His arms came around her, lifting her off the ground, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You came back," she gasped against his neck. "You came back." "Told you I would." His voice was hoarse. "Wild horses remember." She pulled back to look at his face. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, stubble thick on his jaw lips, cracked from the dry wind. But he was smiling. "Did you find him, the judge?" "Found him." Silas reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document. "And he gave me this." Clara took it with trembling hands. The paper was official, stamped with an elaborate seal. She scanned the words, her heart racing. "Emergency injunction," she read aloud, "prohibiting the removal of Clara Winslow and her infant daughter from their current residence pending a full judicial hearing." Her voice gave out. "He can't take you," Silas said quietly. "Not legally, not without a hearing in front of Judge Wheeler himself. And Wheeler's already seen the evidence Mrs. Whitmore's cousin sent ahead. Letters from the doctor who treated Ruth's daughter before she died. Testimony from women in other towns who survived men like Virgil." Clara looked up at him through tears. "How?" "Turns out Agnes Whitmore ain't the only woman who's been keeping records." Silas's jaw tightened. "There's a whole network of them. Wives, mothers, sisters passing information along, documenting what happens behind closed doors. Wheeler's been collecting it for years, waiting for a case strong enough to make an example. And this is that case. If we want it to be." Silas took her hands. "Wheeler says he can grant you a full divorce, sole custody of Nettie, maybe even criminal charges against Virgil for what he tried to do that night in the storm." Clara's knees buckled. Silas caught her, lowering them both to the ground right there in the yard, his arms wrapped around her while she sobbed into his chest. "It's over," she choked out. "It's really over." "Not yet." His voice was gentle but firm. "There's still a hearing. Still a fight ahead. But Clara, we can win this. We can finally win." The sound of small running feet made them both look up. Emmett barreled out of the house and threw himself at his father, nearly knocking Silas over. "Papa? Papa, you're home?" Silas caught the boy and pulled him close, one arm around his son, the other still holding Clara. "I'm home, buddy. I'm home." Clara watched them, father and son, reunited, and felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of the knot that had lived there for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. Maybe this was what hope felt like. The news spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. By afternoon, a steady stream of visitors had appeared at the Brennan Ranch. Some came to gawk. Clara could see it in their eyes, the hungry curiosity of people who'd been fed rumors and wanted to see the truth for themselves. But others came with different intentions. The blacksmith's wife brought a basket of fresh bread. The preacher's widow brought a jar of preserved peaches. The young woman from the post office, barely 20 with a bruise on her cheekbone she tried to hide with her hair, came with nothing but a whispered confession. "My husband." she said, her voice so soft, Clara had to lean in to hear. He does things. Nobody believes me when I try to tell them. Clara took her hands. I believe you. The girl's eyes filled with tears. What do I do? You survive, Clara said. However you have to, and when you're ready to run, you come to me. We'll figure it out together. The girl nodded, wiped her eyes, and slipped away before her husband could notice she was gone. Clara watched her go, her heart heavy. How many others were out there? How many women trapped in houses that looked warm from the outside, but were cold as graves within? Mrs. Whitmore appeared at her elbow. That was good what you said to her. It wasn't enough. It's more than anyone ever said to me. The older woman's voice was rough. Or to my daughter, or to half the women in this town who smile on Sunday and cry every other day of the week. Clara turned to face her. How do we change that? One woman at a time. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes were hard, but not unkind. We tell the truth. We believe each other. We refuse to stay silent. She paused. And we make sure men like Virgil Harkins face consequences. The hearing. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. Judge Wheeler's setting it for next week. Virgil's lawyers are already screaming about jurisdiction procedure, everything they can think of. But Wheeler's not backing down. Clara took a breath. What do I need to do? Tell your story, again, in front of everyone. Mrs. Whitmore met her eyes. Can you do that? Clara thought of Nettie, of Emmett, of Silas, of the girl with the bruise on her cheekbone. Yes, she said, I can do that. Virgil didn't take the injunction well. That evening, just as the sun was setting, he rode up to the property line alone. Not onto the land, the injunction prohibited that, but close enough that Clara could see his face from the window. He sat on his horse perfectly still and stared at the house. Silas went out to meet him, rifle in hand. You're not welcome here, Harkins. I'm not on your property. Virgil's voice was calm, but there was something different about it now. An edge that hadn't been there before, just admiring the view. View's better from somewhere else. I suggest you find it. Virgil didn't move. You know this isn't over, he said. This little piece of paper your judge signed, it doesn't change anything. Clara is my wife. That child is my blood. No court in Texas is going to take her from me. We'll see about that. Will we? Virgil smiled that charming, terrible smile. You know what I think, Mr. Brennan? I think you've gotten attached. I think you've fooled yourself into believing she's something she's not. But Clara has a history of manipulating men, getting them to do what she wants, playing the victim when things don't go her way. The only victim here is the woman you tried to freeze to death. Virgil's smile flickered. She told you that story, did she? The one about me and the baby in the snow? He shook his head. It's a good story. Very dramatic. But that's all it is, a story. Clara was hysterical that night. She imagined the whole thing. I don't think she imagined walking 3 days through a blizzard with an infant in her arms. People do strange things when they're mentally unwell. And I don't think she imagined the bruises, the broken dishes, the way she flinches every time a man raises his voice. Silas's voice dropped low and dangerous. I've seen fear before, Harkins. I know what it looks like. And that woman in there, she's been living with it for years. Because of you. Virgil was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The charm was gone. What remained was something raw and ugly. You think you've won something here? You think that piece of paper makes her yours? He leaned forward in his saddle. I've destroyed better men than you. Richer men. Men with power and connections. You're nothing. A dirt farmer playing house with another man's wife. I'm the man who's going to watch you lose everything. Silas raised the rifle. Now get off my land. Before I decide, this injunction doesn't apply to trespassers. Virgil stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he turned his horse and rode away. Clara was waiting on the porch when Silas returned. What did he say? Nothing that matters. Silas set down the rifle and pulled her into his arms. He's scared. That's why he came. Men like him, they puff up biggest when they're losing. He didn't look scared to me. That's because he's good at hiding it, but I saw it. Silas pulled back to look at her. He knows this isn't going to go his way. He knows Wheeler's got evidence. He knows the whole town is watching now, and he can't charm his way out of it. What if he tries something else, something outside the law? Silas's jaw tightened. Then I'll handle it. Silas. I mean it, Clara. Whatever he does, whatever he tries, I'll handle it. You and Nettie and Emmett are safe as long as I'm breathing. Clara searched his face. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. I'm not getting hurt. He kissed her forehead. I'm not losing anyone else. Not ever again. They stood on the porch as darkness fell, watching the road where Virgil had disappeared. The night passed without incident. The days before the hearing crawled by. Clara spent most of them preparing, going over her testimony with Mrs. Whitmore, answering questions, trying to remember details she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Every memory she dredged up felt like reopening a wound. But she kept going because Nettie's future depended on it. Silas stayed close. He didn't hover, didn't smother, but he was always there, a steady presence in the doorway. A hand on her shoulder when she started to shake, a voice in the darkness when the nightmares came. One night, Clara woke gasping from a dream of snow and cold, and a door opening onto darkness. Silas was beside her in an instant, pulling her close. Murmuring words she couldn't quite hear, but understood anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered when her breathing finally steadied. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't wake me. I wasn't sleeping. She pulled back to look at him. Why not? Because you weren't. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I can feel when you're about to have one of those dreams. Your whole body tenses up. That's ridiculous. You can't possibly. I can. His voice was quiet but certain. I've been watching you sleep for weeks now, Clara. I know your breathing when it's peaceful. I know how it changes when the nightmares start. And I know that the only thing I can do is be here when you wake up. Clara's eyes burned. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? You barely knew me when I showed up on your porch. I was just a stranger with a baby, and now you're fighting battles for me, riding to Austin, standing up to Virgil. Because you're not a stranger. Silas cupped her face in his hands. You stopped being a stranger the moment I saw you on your knees in the snow, offering me everything you had left just to save your child. I knew then. I knew you were different. Different how? Brave, strong, willing to burn the whole world down for the people you love. His thumb traced her cheekbone. That's not something you see every day. That's not something you let go of when you find it. Clara closed her eyes. I'm not brave. I was terrified. I still am. Bravery ain't the absence of fear. Silas's voice was gentle. It's doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. That's what you've been doing all along. That's what you're going to keep doing. What if it's not enough? What if we go to that hearing, and Virgil's lawyers tear me apart? What if the judge believes him instead of me? Then we'll figure out something else. Run if we have to. Start over somewhere far away. You do that. Leave everything you've built here. This land, this house, it's just wood and dirt. Clara, you and Emmett and Nettie, you're what matters. You're what I'd fight to keep. Clara opened her eyes. I love you, she said. The words came out before she could stop them, hanging in the darkness between them. Silas went still. For a terrible moment, Clara thought she'd made a mistake. Said too much, too soon, pushed too hard, ruined everything. Then he kissed her. Not gentle this time. Not careful. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and light, and everything he'd been missing for 4 long years. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers, and Clara felt something inside her break open, not painfully, but like a door finally swinging wide after being locked for too long. When they finally pulled apart, both gasping, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I've loved you since you walked through that door half frozen and told me you'd trade your baby for bread. I just didn't know what to call it." Clara laughed a wet, broken sound that was half sob. "We're a mess, aren't we? The biggest mess in Texas." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But we're a mess together, and that's all that matters." The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. Clara dressed in her best clothes, Ruth's Sunday dress altered by Mrs. Whitmore to fit her smaller frame. She braided her hair carefully, pinned it up, and studied her reflection in the small mirror by the bedroom door. She looked pale, tired, but her eyes were steady. "You ready?" Silas appeared behind her. "No," Clara admitted, "but I'm going anyway." He nodded. "That's all anyone can ask." They rode to town together, Nettie bundled warm against Clara's chest, Emmett perched in front of Silas on the saddle. Mrs. Whitmore had gone ahead to secure seats in the courthouse and spread the word that today was the day. By the time they arrived, the street outside was crowded. Clara hadn't expected so many people. Farmers, shopkeepers, wives, children all gathered to watch. Some faces were curious, some hostile, but others held something that surprised her: support. The blacksmith's wife caught her eye and nodded. The preacher's widow raised a hand in silent greeting. The young woman from the post office, her bruise faded now to yellow, stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with fierce intensity. Clara straightened her spine. She could do this. Inside the courthouse, Judge Wheeler sat at the bench, a lean man in his 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Virgil was already seated at a table on the right, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He looked immaculate, composed every inch the wronged husband. Clara took her place on the left, Mrs. Whitmore beside her, Silas a steadying presence at her back. "This hearing will come to order," Judge Wheeler said. "The matter before me is a petition for divorce filed by Clara Winslow against Virgil Harkins, along with a counter-petition filed by Mr. Harkins for custody of the minor child, Annette Harkins." He looked at Virgil. "Mr. Harkins, you claim your wife abandoned the marital home without cause and kidnapped your daughter. Is that correct?" Virgil rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. My wife suffers from postpartum hysteria. She became paranoid delusional and ultimately fled in the middle of a dangerous storm, putting our child's life at risk. I've spent months searching for her, desperate to bring her home and get her the medical help she needs." "And you deny any allegations of abuse or violence?" "Completely." Virgil's voice was calm, sincere, the voice of a man with nothing to hide. "I have never laid a hand on my wife in anger. The accusations she's made are symptoms of her illness, nothing more." Judge Wheeler nodded slowly. "Mrs. Winslow?" Clara stood. Her knees were shaking, but her voice came out steady. "Everything he just said is a lie." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "I am not hysterical," Clara continued. "I am not delusional. I am a woman who spent 2 years living in fear of a man who hit me, degraded me, and ultimately tried to murder my infant daughter by leaving her in a snowstorm to freeze to death." "Objection." One of Virgil's lawyers rose. "These are unsubstantiated accusations with no evidence." "I have evidence." Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "A letter from the doctor who treated me after Nettie was born. He documented bruises on my arms and back bruises. I told him came from a fall because I was too afraid to tell the truth." She handed the letter to Judge Wheeler. "I also have testimony from Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, who saw my condition when I arrived in Cedar Falls after walking for 3 days through a blizzard, and from Mr. Silas Brennan, who took me into his home when I was half dead from cold and starvation." "Your Honor, this is hearsay." "Sit down, Mr. Collins." Judge Wheeler's voice was sharp. "I'll decide what's admissible in my courtroom." He read the doctor's letter slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked at Clara. You say he tried to murder your daughter. Tell me exactly what happened. Clara took a breath, and she told him. Everything. The storm, the crying Virgil's footsteps on the floor, the door opening onto darkness, the words that still echoed in her nightmares. Maybe she'll learn silence if the cold takes her. By the time she finished, her voice was shaking, but she didn't cry. She didn't look away. She looked at Virgil. He stared back, his mask finally slipping. In his eyes, she saw what she'd always seen: rage, contempt, the absolute certainty that he was entitled to control her. But now the whole courtroom could see it too. Your Honor, Virgil's lawyer rose again. My client vehemently denies these allegations. Mrs. Winslow has clearly been coached to make these outlandish claims as part of an attempt to steal his child, and I've heard enough. Judge Wheeler's voice cut through the room like a blade. He set down the letter and folded his hands. In my 30 years on the bench, I've learned to read people. I've learned to tell when someone's lying and when they're telling a truth so painful they can barely speak it. He looked at Virgil. Mr. Harkins, you're a polished speaker, charming, convincing, the kind of man who knows exactly what to say and when to say it. He paused. But your wife's hands are shaking so badly she can barely hold the rail. Her voice breaks every time she mentions your name, and when she talks about that night in the storm, I see something in her eyes that no amount of hysteria could fake. He leaned forward. I see the truth. Virgil's face went pale. Your Honor, I'm granting the divorce. Judge Wheeler's voice was final. I'm awarding sole custody of Annette Winslow, that's her name now, to her mother. And I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Winslow, her daughter, or the Brennan property. You can't do this. I just did. Judge Wheeler stood. Furthermore, I'm forwarding the evidence presented here today to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. Attempted murder of an infant is not something this court takes lightly. Virgil lunged to his feet. This is a farce. You're taking the word of a hysterical woman over. Remove him. Judge Wheeler gestured to the bailiff. This hearing is adjourned. The next few moments were chaos. Virgil shouted as the bailiff grabbed his arm. His lawyers protested. The crowd erupted in murmurs and gasps. But Clara heard none of it. She stood frozen at the rail, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Then Silas was there, his arms around her, his voice in her ear. You did it. You did it, Clara. It's over. She turned and buried her face in his chest. The tears finally came. Outside the courthouse, the crowd parted for them. Some people stared, some whispered, but others reached out, touching Clara's arm, murmuring congratulations, nodding with something that looked like respect. The young woman from the post office caught Clara's eye. She was crying, but she was smiling too. Clara smiled back. Mrs. Whitmore was waiting by the horses, Emmett bouncing impatiently beside her. Well, the older woman demanded. Don't keep me in suspense. He lost. Clara's voice came out strange, like she wasn't quite sure it was real. Virgil lost. I got everything. Mrs. Whitmore's face transformed. For just a moment the hard lines softened, and Clara saw the woman she must have been before grief turned her to stone. Good, she said quietly. That's good. Emmett tugged on Clara's skirt. Does this mean we can go home now? Clara looked down at him. This boy who had called her mama before she'd earned it, who had stood between her and Virgil with his tiny fists raised, who had waited by the window every day for his father to return. Yes, she said, scooping him up. We can go home. Silas helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her, his arms coming around to take the reins. Nettie nestled warm and safe against Clara's chest. As they rode out of town, Clara looked back once. Virgil stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by his lawyers, watching them go. His face was a mask of cold fury, but Clara felt no fear, Not anymore. She turned forward and leaned into Silas's warmth. The road home stretched ahead of them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Winslow rode toward the future instead of running from the past. The weeks after the hearing passed like water over stones, slowly smoothing the sharp edges of fear into something softer. Clara woke each morning, still half expecting to hear Virgil's footsteps on the floorboards, still bracing for the crash of thrown dishes, the venom of whispered insults. But instead she heard birdsong through the window. Emmett's laughter from the yard. Silas's low voice humming as he made coffee in the kitchen. It took time to believe it was real. Some nights she still dreamed of snow and cold and a door opening onto darkness. She would wake gasping, heart pounding, and find Silas already awake beside her, his hand reaching for hers in the dark. "I'm here," he would say. "You're safe." And slowly, night by night, she began to believe him. Spring came to Cedar Falls like a benediction. The snow melted into rushing streams that carved silver paths through the valley. The cedar trees shook off their white coats and stood green and proud against pale blue skies. Wildflowers pushed through the softening earth bluebonnets, and Indian paintbrush their colors so bright they almost hurt to look at. Clara planted a garden behind the house. Silas built her raised beds from the cedar he'd been saving, and Emmett helped her press seeds into the dark soil, his small hands patient and careful. "What are we planting?" he asked. "Tomatoes, beans, squash, maybe some flowers too if we're lucky. Can we plant cookies?" Clara laughed a real laugh, full and warm, the kind she'd almost forgotten she could make. "Cookies don't grow in gardens, sweetheart." "That's dumb," Emmett said seriously. "Someone should fix that." Silas appeared behind them, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's dumb?" "Cookies don't grow," Emmett explained. "Mama says so. Your mama's usually right about these things." Silas caught Clara's eye over Emmett's head, and something passed between them, a look full of tenderness and wonder, as if neither of them could quite believe they'd found each other. "Usually?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Well," Silas's mouth twitched. "There was that time you said you could milk a goat." "I can milk a goat. You got more on yourself than in the bucket." "That was one time." "It was 3 times," Emmett giggled. Clara tried to look offended, but couldn't hold it. She dissolved into laughter, and Silas's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close, while their son watched with delight. This, Clara thought. This is what family feels like. The wedding was small. They held it in the parlor of the ranch house on a Sunday afternoon in late April. Reverend Crane officiated, his voice steady and kind. Mrs. Whitmore stood as Clara's witness, her weathered face soft with something that might have been tears. Emmett held the ring on a small pillow, trembling with the importance of his role. Nettie, now 5 months old and growing stronger every day, slept through the entire ceremony in a basket by the fire. Clara wore Ruth's wedding dress, altered, mended, made new. Silas had offered to buy her something else, something that didn't carry the weight of another woman's memory, but Clara had refused. "Ruth was part of this family," she'd said. "She helped build this home. She gave you Emmett. I want to honor that, not erase it." Silas had looked at her for a long moment, his eyes bright with something he couldn't say. Then he'd nodded once and kissed her forehead. Now, standing before the Reverend with her hand in Silas's, Clara felt Ruth's presence like a warm wind at her back. Not haunting, blessing. "Do you, Clara Winslow, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "And do you, Silas Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Silas's hand tightened around hers. His voice was rough when he spoke. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Crane smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Silas cupped her face in his hands, those rough, gentle hands that had saved her life, built her a home, held her through nightmares, and kissed her softly. Emmett cheered. Mrs. Whitmore wiped her eyes and pretended she wasn't crying. And Clara Brennan no longer. Winslow, no longer Harkins. Finally herself felt the last chains of her old life fall away. The news of Virgil's arrest reached Cedar Falls 2 weeks later. Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when Sheriff Baker rode up to the fence. She tensed automatically, old habits dying hard, but his face held no threat. If anything, he looked almost satisfied. "Mrs. Brennan?" He tipped his hat. "Thought you'd want to know. Virgil Harkins was arrested yesterday in Austin. Judge Wheeler's criminal charges finally went through." Clara's hands stilled on the clothesline. "What charges?" "Attempted murder of a minor. Assault. Domestic violence." The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Seems once word got out about your case, other women started coming forward. 2 in Austin, 1 in Houston, another in San Antonio." He paused. "You weren't the first, Mrs. Brennan, but you might be the last." Clara's throat tightened. "What will happen to him?" "Prison, most likely. Wheeler's pushing for the maximum sentence, with this many witnesses, this much evidence." The sheriff shook his head. "He won't be hurting anyone for a long time." Clara nodded slowly. She should have felt triumphant, she supposed, vindicated, but mostly she just felt tired and sad for all the women who'd suffered before her, whose voices had gone unheard. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "Thank you for speaking up." The sheriff met her eyes. "I know it wasn't easy, but what you did in that courtroom, it mattered. It's still mattering." He tipped his hat again and rode away. Clara stood in the yard for a long time, the clean laundry forgotten, the spring breeze cool against her face. She thought about the girl in the post office with the bruise on her cheekbone, about Mrs. Whitmore's daughter who died at the bottom of the stairs, about all the women in all the houses who smiled on Sunday and wept the rest of the week. She couldn't save them all, she knew that, but maybe, just maybe, she could help some of them find the courage to save themselves. The idea came to her slowly, like seeds taking root in dark soil. She talked to Silas about it first, sitting together on the porch after the children were asleep. "I want to do something," she said. "Something to help women like me. Women who are trapped and don't know how to get out." Silas listened, his face thoughtful. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe a place they can go, a safe house. Somewhere to stay while they figure out their next steps." Clara turned to look at him. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that network of women who've been documenting abuse cases. Maybe I could be part of that, help spread the word. Let women know they're not alone." "That's dangerous work," Silas said slowly. "Men like Virgil don't take kindly to people interfering in their business." "I know." Clara's jaw tightened. "But staying silent is more dangerous. For the women. For their children." She paused. "I can't forget what it felt like, Silas. Standing on that porch in the snow, offering my baby to a stranger because I had nothing left. If someone had helped me sooner, if I'd known there was somewhere to go, you might not have had to nearly die to get free." "Exactly." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. "What do you need from me?" Clara's heart swelled. "Just your support, your understanding. I know it might bring trouble to our door, but—" "Clara?" Silas squeezed her hand. "Trouble already came to our door. We handled it. We'll handle whatever comes next, too." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "If this is what you need to do, then do it. I'll be right beside you." Clara leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "I love you." "I know." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I love you too." The spring turned to summer. Clara wrote letters to Judge Wheeler, to Mrs. Whitmore's network, to women's groups in Austin and Houston and San Antonio. She told her story over and over, each telling stripping away another layer of shame until only the truth remained. The responses came slowly at first. A letter here, a visitor there. Women who'd heard about the trial and wanted to know more. Women who had stories of their own and needed someone to believe them. Clara listened to everyone. Some she could help directly connecting them with sympathetic lawyers, arranging safe transport to relatives in other towns. Others she could only comfort, holding their hands and telling them that survival itself was a victory. Mrs. Whitmore became her unlikely partner in this work. The older woman's sharp tongue and sharper eyes were invaluable for cutting through deception and getting to the heart of each case. "You're good at this," Mrs. Whitmore said one afternoon after a particularly difficult conversation with a young mother fleeing an abusive father-in-law. "Better than I expected. Is that a compliment? Don't let it go to your head." But there was warmth in the older woman's voice. "You've got something most people lack. You can look at someone's pain without flinching, without trying to fix it before they're ready." Clara thought about that for a long time. Maybe all those years of suffering had given her something after all. Not strength exactly, she'd always had that, but understanding. The ability to sit with darkness without being consumed by it. If that was Virgil's unintended gift to her, she would use it to undo everything he stood for. Nettie took her first steps on a hot July afternoon. Clara was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard Emmett's excited shout from the parlor. "Mama! Mama, come quick!" She wiped her hands and hurried to the doorway, then stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Nettie stood in the middle of the room, wobbling on her chubby legs, her arms outstretched for balance. Emmett crouched a few feet away, his hands reaching toward her. "Come on, Nettie, you can do it. Walk to me." Nettie grinned, showing her two tiny teeth. She lifted one foot, set it down, lifted the other. Step, step, wobble, step. She made it 3 paces before tumbling into Emmett's arms. "She did it!" Emmett crowed, scooping her up and spinning her around. "Did you see Mama? She walked." Clara's vision blurred with tears. "I saw, sweetheart. I saw." Silas appeared behind her, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, Emmett holding Nettie, both children laughing, Clara crying happy tears in the doorway, and his face softened into a smile so pure it made Clara's heart ache. "Looks like we've got a walker," he said. "We've got a family." Clara turned into his arms. A real family. Silas held her tight. "We always did, from the moment you walked through that door." The summer stretched long and golden. Emmett grew 2 inches and lost his first tooth. Nettie learned to say Mama and Papa and M for her brother, whose name was too complicated for her tiny mouth. The garden flourished beyond Clara's wildest hopes, producing tomatoes so red and sweet they tasted like sunshine. Clara continued her work with the Women's Network. The safe house she'd dreamed of became a reality, not on the Brennan property, but on a farm 10 miles outside of town, run by a widow named Margaret, whose husband had died, leaving her with land and purpose. Women came and went, some staying only a few days, others remaining for weeks until they found their footing. Each one who left safely felt like a victory. Each one who didn't, who went back, who couldn't break free, who disappeared into the silence of houses that looked warm from the outside, felt like a wound. But Clara kept going, because stopping wasn't an option, because every woman saved was a woman who might save others someday, because the work was never done, but it was always worth doing. In late August, a letter arrived from Judge Wheeler. Clara opened it at the kitchen table, Silas reading over her shoulder. "Mrs. Brennan," it began, "I am writing to inform you that Virgil Harkins has been sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary. The charges of attempted murder, assault, and domestic violence were proven beyond reasonable doubt, thanks in large part to your testimony and the evidence you helped gather." Clara's hands trembled. "The judge also wished me to convey his personal thanks," the letter continued. "Your courage in coming forward has inspired other victims to do the same. The network of witnesses you helped establish has already contributed to 3 additional convictions in other counties. You have done more for the cause of justice in Texas than most attorneys accomplish in a lifetime." She set the letter down. 15 years, she whispered. Silas's hand found her shoulder. "It's not enough. he said quietly. Not for what he did. No. Clara took a breath. But it's something. And the women who came forward, they wouldn't have spoken up if I hadn't. That matters. You matter. Silas turned her chair to face him and knelt before her. Everything you've done, everyone you've helped, that's because of you. Not the judge, not the network, you. Clara cupped his face in her hands. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Yes, you could. His voice was fierce. You were surviving long before I came along. You walked through a blizzard with a baby in your arms. You faced down Virgil in a courtroom. You built something that's going to outlast both of us. He covered her hands with his. I just got lucky enough to stand beside you while you did it. Clara kissed him. It wasn't a soft kiss or a careful one. It was a kiss that held everything she felt: gratitude, love, wonder at the improbable miracle of their life together. When they finally broke apart, Silas was smiling. What was that for? For finding me, Clara said. For opening your door. For being stubborn enough to love a half-frozen stranger who showed up on your porch begging for bread. That stranger was the best thing that ever happened to me. The second best. Clara glanced toward the window where Emmett and Nettie were playing in the yard. They're the first. Silas looked to, his face full of a joy that still surprised him every single day. Fair enough. Fall came early that year, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. On a crisp October evening, the Brennan family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Emmett sat on the steps whittling a piece of wood the way his father had taught him. Nettie toddled between Clara and Silas, laughing each time she reached one of them, and was swung gently into the air. Mrs. Whitmore had come for dinner and stayed for the sunset, her rocking chair creaking rhythmically beside Clara's. You've done well, the older woman said quietly. Building this life, building that network. Ruth would have liked you, I think. Clara looked at her surprised. Mrs. Whitmore rarely spoke of Ruth directly. You knew her. Everyone knew everyone in those days. She was a good woman, kind, stubborn as a mule when she set her mind to something. Mrs. Whitmore smiled faintly. You remind me of her sometimes. Same fire in the eyes. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and turned back to the sunset. The sky was ablaze, oranges and pinks and deep purples streaking across the horizon like God had taken a paintbrush to the heavens. The air smelled of wood smoke and autumn leaves and the particular sweetness of dying grass. Silas settled into the chair beside Clara, Nettie drowsy in his arms. Happy? He asked quietly. Clara thought about the question. A year ago she had been running through a blizzard with nothing but a baby and a prayer. She had been hungry, freezing, convinced she was going to die. She had knocked on 3 doors and been turned away from all of them. She had dropped to her knees in the snow and offered her child to a stranger because she had nothing left to give. Now she sat on a porch that belonged to her beside a man who loved her, watching her children play in the fading light of a beautiful day. She had a home, a purpose, a community of women who looked to her for guidance and strength. She had everything she'd never dared to hope for. Yes, she said. I'm happy. Silas reached over and took her hand. Good. You deserve it. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the last light fade from the sky. Emmett finished his whittling and held up his creation, a small, imperfect heart carved from cedar. For you, Mama, he said, pressing it into Clara's free hand. So you don't forget. Clara's eyes burned. Forget what, sweetheart? That we love you. Emmett climbed into her lap, too big for it now, but not caring. Me and Papa and Nettie. We love you forever. Clara held him close, breathing in the little boy smell of dirt and sunshine, and the cedar shavings that clung to his hair. I won't forget, she whispered. I promise. That night, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Whitmore had gone home, Clara stood alone in the doorway of the nursery Silas had kept locked for 4 years. It wasn't locked anymore. The pale yellow walls had been repainted a soft cream. The dusty furniture had been cleaned, polished, made new. Nettie's crib stood where Ruth's baby things had once waited, and on the shelf above it sat the wooden heart Emmett had carved. Clara walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit valley. Somewhere out there, women were suffering in silence. Children were crying in cold rooms. Doors were being slammed. Fists were being raised. Hope was being extinguished, one cruel word at a time. Clara couldn't save them all, but she could save some, and that would have to be enough. She pressed her hand to the cold glass and made a silent promise to Ruth, to her own mother, to every woman who had ever been told she was worthless, and believed it. I will keep fighting. I will keep speaking. I will keep opening doors, because that's what love does. It opens doors. And the rancher who had opened his door on that frozen night had given her more than shelter. He had given her a future, a family, a chance to become the woman she was always meant to be. Clara Brennan turned from the window and walked down the hall to the bedroom where her husband waited. She slipped beneath the covers, and Silas's arms came around her without a word, warm, steady, safe. Outside, the wind whispered through the cedar trees. Inside, the fire crackled low. And in a small cabin at the edge of a valley, surrounded by children and love and the fierce determination of a woman who had refused to die, something beautiful had taken root. Something that would grow. Something that would last. Something no storm could ever destroy. Because Clara Brennan had learned the truth that winter night when she'd begged for bread and been given everything instead. Home isn't a place you find. It's something you build with courage, with hope, with the stubborn belief that even the coldest night will eventually give way to dawn. And love, true love, isn't a fairy tale. It's a door that opens when you have nothing left to give. It's a hand that lifts you from the snow. It's a voice that says, stay when the whole world is telling you to run. It's a family imperfect and beautiful, built from broken pieces and held together by choice. Clara closed her eyes. Silas's heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. And for the first time in her life, Clara Brennan slept without dreaming of the cold, the end. If this story touched your heart, if you held your breath when she fell to her knees in the snow, if you felt the warmth when he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, if you believed in their love, even when everything seemed impossible, then you know why stories like this matter. Hit that like button if you felt every moment of their journey. And subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where every week we bring you more tales of courage, redemption, and love forged in the fire of the American frontier. Tap that bell so you never miss a story where hope is stronger than fear, and home is something you build with your own two hands. Until next time, ride safe. And remember, even in the darkest storms, love is the door that never closes.